So, gonna go out on a limb here and assume that North Korea probably isn't the first country that springs to mind when you think of megaprojects, and yet, despite the joke status the world at large has given to North Korea, it does occasionally beat all expectations and accomplish some legitimately quite impressive stuff. Really. And today we're going to have a look at a few such achievements because this is 4 successful North Korean megaprojects. Oh, and because it never hurts to specify these things on the internet, don't worry, this video isn't the result of us having downed our own body weight in Kool-Aid and then coming to you all to argue that North Korea is actually a magical wondrous utopia. No, it's intended exactly how we introduced it. Surprisingly competent achievements from an unexpected country. So let's get into it. Our first North Korean megaproject may come as something of a surprise to you, as it isn't something that gets much coverage in the news, but yes, North Korea does actually have a fully legit, no games, no tricks, space program. Make no mistake, it's not exactly NASA or Roscosmos. Don't think we'll be seeing a North Korean on the moon anytime soon, but it is certainly something that makes you raise an eyebrow and go, wow, okay, credit where it's due. That's actually quite impressive, all things considered, North Korea. Well done! North Korea's aspirations in space go right the way back to the nation's earliest years, when Kim Il-sung was putting together his tick list for what he wanted his great and mighty new nation to achieve. And what better way to prove that you are one of the big boys on the world stage than getting a space program? Now, little progress was made on that front for a very long time, as what with fighting and then clearing up after a war that killed 20% of the country's population and reduced basically all of it to rubble, the country had a bit more pressing things on its plate. But come 1980, during the autumn years of Kim Il-sung's rule, space was back on the agenda. And so the Korean Committee of Space Technology, or KCST, that's North Korea's NASA, was founded. But would you believe it? It turns out that space is rather difficult of a nut to crack. And so while a lot of work was happening behind the scenes to get to grip with the basics, basically nothing to show off came from the program until 1998, by which time Kim Il-sung was dead and his son Kim Jong-il had assumed power. And Kim Sr. was probably glad he didn't live to see it, to be fair, because the show-offable thing in question, the launch of North Korea's first satellite, the Bright Star 1, ended in complete disaster, with the Mount Pike 2-1 rocket carrying it failing to reach orbit and breaking up in the atmosphere, and perhaps unsurprisingly, word of its failure didn't seem to reach North Korea's media, who claimed that, quote, under Kim Jong-il's deep love and wise guidance, the scientists and technicians developed space science by their own efforts and succeeded in launching the first artificial satellite into orbit at one try. Now, the boffins over at KCST, however, were under no delusions as to the truth, and so they went back to the drawing board and set about creating a rocket that would, actually work. This led to the creation of the Galaxy series of rockets. Now, we don't know much about the rocket's development or construction other than the fact that it is a 3-stage rocket that Western experts believe can carry 200 kilograms or so in payload. And when we say we don't know very much about this, we really do mean it. Look, our main sources for the North Korean side of today's video is North Korean media itself, accessed both through KCNA Watch, a Western collator of North Korean news, and the North Korean Central News Agency archived directly, and we didn't find a single reference to the rocket until its launch was announced with the snappily titled article, Preparations for Launch of Experimental Communications Satellite in Full Gear in February 2009. But don't worry, because while we may know next to nothing about the rocket itself, we know more than enough about how its launches went. Its first launch, on the 5th of April 2009, a Galaxy 2 type, carrying the Bright Star 2 satellite, again ended in failure and didn't reach orbit, as did the next launch on the 13th of April 2012, carrying the all-new Bright Star 3 satellite on a new and improved Galaxy 3 type rocket. But then, somehow, North Korea's luck started to improve, as on the 12th of December 2012, another Galaxy 3 rocket was launched, this time carrying the new and improved Bright Star 3 Mark II satellite, and all went well. It achieved an orbit of 300 or so miles above the Earth, and everything was fully confirmed by NASA. But this success was short-lived, as less than a day after its launch, it tumbled out of control and was soon out of action, seemingly having been deployed incorrectly. The next launch came on the 7th of February 2016, when KCST, now rebranded as the National Aerospace Development Administration, or NADA, launched a new Bright Star 4 satellite from an also new Galaxy 4 rocket, and it went perfectly. It achieved orbit and stayed there until the 30th of June 2023, at which point Hyong Kwang-il, a director at NADA, claimed that it had performed 2,513 orbits of the Earth, but he also claims that North Korea is working on a moon mission. So, maybe a little pinch of salt, yes? This was then followed by a whole new rocket series, the Chalima, and a whole new spy satellite model, the Telescope 1. Chalimas 1 through 3, all carrying that satellite type, were launched on the 30th of May, 23rd of August, and 21st of November 2023, respectively. Just like earlier, the results were a mixed bag. 1 and 2 both failed to launch, but 3 launched and deployed its satellite perfectly, which still floats above our head as we speak, although its functionality is unknown. And this brings us back to the point made right at the beginning of this chapter. Is this the stuff of NASA or Roscosmos? Well, no, absolutely not. But given how different space travel is for any country, period, the fact that North Korea achieved what it did with its very limited resources is honestly pretty impressive, no matter what we think of the country more widely. For our next North Korean megaproject, let's look at something very closely related to space rockets, intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs. Just like we saw with its space program, North Korea's dream of ICBMs was a slow-burning thing. It has its roots back in the late 1970s and early 1980s, when they were still trying to get their head around basic tactical missile systems, missiles with a 300-kilometer or so range. Most of this early work consisted of reverse engineering other people's missiles, specifically Soviet Scuds, which weirdly they had to acquire through Egypt, of all places, as the Soviet Union itself flatly refused to give them any. This led to the development of basic missiles such as the Hwasong-5, which entered service in 1985, had a range of bang-on 300 kilometers, and has a warhead of just under 1,000 kilos of conventional explosives. This gave North Korea the confidence it needed to have a crack at the more serious stuff. But it was ultimately a confidence that was misplaced. As we saw with space rockets, North Korea really struggled with the big stuff, and its military missiles were no exception. Come the 4th of July 2017, however, decades later, they finally nailed it and tested the Hwasong-14, their first true ICBM. The test saw the missile travel 930 kilometers, reach an altitude of 2,802 kilometers, and land in the Sea of Japan after flying for around 40 minutes. Fortunately, at least, experts predicted that it would only have a maximum range of 6,700 kilometers, enough to hit anywhere in Alaska, but not the contiguous United States. That relief was short-lived, however, because 24 days after that first test, North Korea did it again, and this time the assessment was very different, with Jeffrey Lewis, a researcher at the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies, estimating that this time it appeared as though it has a 10,000-kilometer range on a 45-minute flight time, enough to hit major US cities such as Denver and Chicago. Next came the Hwasong-15, which had its maiden test on the 28th of November 2017. Outwardly, its test yielded more or less the same results as that of the Hwasong-14, traveling for 50 minutes, during which time it hit 4,500 kilometers in altitude, 970 kilometers in distance, and landed in the Sea of Japan. But to those in the know, this test was the real underpant Browning stuff, as experts predicted that this new missile could have a maximum theoretical range of 13,000 kilometers, enough to hit the entire continental US. But there's more, because since then, North Korea has also unveiled the Hwasong 16 through 18, each of which is an improvement over what came before it, and the last of which, the 18, is the daddy of the North Korean arsenal. Janes, a trusted name in open-source intelligence work, believes that it has a maximum range of 15,000 kilometers, enough to hit everything except South America, and most terrifyingly of all, they also believe that it could well be a multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicle, i.e. it'd be able to launch more than one warhead while at altitude and thus strike multiple targets in one attack. It's legitimately the stuff of nightmares, but once again, you have to give credit where it's due. This kind of tech would be difficult for any nation to develop, never mind North Korea. So, now that we all know about the North Korean ICBM program, let's now move on to have a look at what they stick in the things. Nukes. We could bet a kidney on the fact that this is a megaproject of which you are all well aware, thanks to it being a go-to staple of Western news cycles. But have you ever stopped to think about just how odd it is that North Korea does so well with them, given their pariah status on the world stage and their near non-existent economy? Because really, it is weird, isn't it? The exact beginning of their endeavor to acquire nuclear weapons is difficult to place. In much the same way that Kim Il-sung dreamed big and wanted space rockets, he naturally also wanted nuclear weapons pretty much from the offset. I mean, why wouldn't he? But beyond the odds, wouldn't it be nice if we got some of those? Comment from time to time, real efforts to acquire them was pretty much non-existent in the early days. We know that he approached the Soviet Union in 1963 to directly petition for their assistance, as well as China around the same time, but both turned him down. But the Soviets did offer to lend assistance in developing a civil nuclear energy program. Kim just couldn't believe his luck, and after shaking on the deal while keeping his fingers crossed behind his back, Soviet engineers began arriving in earnest in 1964 to get things set up, which led to the establishment of the Yongbyon Nuclear Scientific Research Center that same year, and the beginning of uranium mining in Suchon and Pyeongsan shortly afterwards. Fortunately, North Korea is lucky enough to be sitting on 4 million tons of high-grade uranium, so neither Kim Sr. nor his kids will have to ever worry about supply issues. From there, things slowly progressed, a small nuclear reactor being built in Yongbyon in 1986 to allow for the production of plutonium, and that was just about it. There had plenty of other things planned in that period, including the construction of light water reactors to begin expanding the project to legitimate civilian applications too, but projects such as that were being done with the assistance of the Soviet Union, and with the country's collapse in 1991, work on many projects just ceased. The world was paying attention in this period, however, and even before the Soviet Union collapsed, efforts were being made to rein North Korea's ambitions in, which saw them sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1985 and agree to freeze plutonium production in 1994. This was all just for show, however, and behind the scenes, work continued. Come the new millennium, North Korea was finally getting close to finishing a bomb after nearly 40 years of work. And when they withdrew from the Non-Proliferation Treaty in 2003, the whole world knew exactly what was coming next. And on the 9th of October 2006, Kim Jong-il pushed the big red button, initiating the country's first atomic test, detonating a half-kiloton or so warhead at an underground site in Kilju County. For reference, the little boy bomb dropped on Hiroshima had a yield of 15 kilotons, but that didn't matter. It was a proof of concept test, not a maximum yield test, and so North Korean media couldn't be more pleased, proclaiming that the test was, quote, a stirring time when all the people of the country were making a great leap forward in the building of a great, prosperous, powerful socialist nation. Another test then came on the 25th of May 2009. This one had a yield of probably around 2.4 kilotons, and most likely had the very scientific rationale of reminding the world that when Kim Jong-il soon passed away, North Korea was still packing nukes, and so the new boy wasn't to be messed with. This was then followed by a third 8 to 10 kiloton test on the 12th of February 2013. The aim of that one? To wind up the Americans after they disapproved of the Bright Star 3 Mark II launch, quoting, "The test conducted by the DPRK today is part of substantial counteraction against the US's hostile policy. The attitude toward the DPRK's successful launch of satellite, Bright Star 3 Mark II in particular, pushed the resentment of its army and people to an unbearable phase." From there, North Korea's approach actually was much more scientific. The next one, conducted on the 6th of January 2016 with a yield of roughly 10 kilotons or so, was claimed to be a hydrogen bomb proof of concept test for a weapon type which would equip their ICBMs going forward, and then another one on the 20 to 30 kiloton range on the 9th of September of that same year, believed to be for testing the more refined version of their ICBM warhead. Then came the final test at the time of writing, and that happened on the 3rd of September 2017. This was also their biggest one yet, with a yield of anywhere from 50 kilotons, according to the South Korean Meteorological Administration, up to 271 kilotons, according to the Indian Space Research Organization. The goal of this one? Announcing that their nuclear program had concluded, quoting, "The perfect success of the test of the H-bomb for ICBMs clearly proved that the Juche-backed nukes of the DPRK have fully guaranteed the design and production technology of nuclear weapons of the DPRK. It also marked a very significant occasion in attaining the first goal of completing the state nuclear force." Since then, North Korea's main aim has been to mass produce high yields of atomic weapons, and given that it now has an estimated 40 to 50 warheads, it would appear as though they've succeeded. Once again, this isn't a megaproject that sparks any joy, don't get us wrong, but you have to hand it to them. It's a hell of an achievement for an isolated little pariah state. North Korea has a surprisingly long-lived history of building its own submarines. Like all communist satellite states, it of course was gifted some from some more powerful friends, such as the Chinese Type 033 class, itself a reverse-engineered Soviet Romeo class, but such submarines actually represent a very small amount of its overall force, with the majority of it instead being made up of indigenously produced types such as the Yono class, which first entered service in 1965, and the Sang-o and Yugo classes, which entered service in 1991 and the late 1960s respectively. On its own, this would be a commendable enough achievement to be sure, but given the fact that they're all just normal submarines with nothing nuclear about them at all, either in their engine or weaponry, it could hardly be called a megaproject, worthy of a slow clap. But, I mean, sure, worthy of a slow golf clap, but certainly not mega. That all changed, though, in September 2023, when this beast, the Hero Kim Kun-ok, the first Sinpo-class submarine, was kicked down the slipway of Pongdae Submarine Factory and formally commissioned. To call her a bit of an improvement over the other Cold War clunkers in North Korea's arsenal would be just a bit of an understatement, as unlike them, which are attack submarines designed to launch torpedoes, she is a proper, fully fledged ballistic missile submarine, the kind that sit under the water and throw nuclear missiles at cities thousands of kilometers away. Before you get too excited, however, note that while she is nuclear armed, she is not nuclear powered and instead uses good old-fashioned diesel engines to push her about. For this reason, she is not a submarine on par with, say, the British Vanguard or American Ohio classes, as this engine makes her way less stealthy in the water and unable to stay submerged for months at a time. But you have to give the North Koreans credit where it's due. Even if it isn't world-leading, to develop such a machine at all is a really impressive achievement. Her teeth come from 10 missile tubes, 4 large ones and 6 smaller ones, as seen on the press release photos. And as for what it launched from them, well, we aren't entirely too sure, to be honest, as the North Koreans have kept their information close to their chest. So instead, let's go through a few different potentials and just vaguely gesture in their direction and say, no, one of them is probably it. For starters, it could be the Pukgoksong-1 submarine-launched ballistic missile, SLMB, that was first tested in 2016 and has a range of anything between 500 kilometers, as confirmed by test launches, or 2,500 kilometers, as speculated by the South Korean Ministry of Defense. As for its payload, well, good question. It is generally believed that it could take either a conventional warhead of 500 kilograms or so, as assumed purely by its physical dimensions, or a nuclear payload, be it a single big warhead or a MIRV arrangement, but as for what their yields are, we have no idea. It could also fire Pukgoksong-3, which we again know very little about, but from its name it's presumably either an improved version of the Pukgoksong-1 or an entirely new type of missile that is just better than its forerunner. What we do know, however, is that it has been test-fired only once, with a successful launch from an unidentified underwater testbed in October 2019. From the distance of this launch, we can also deduce that it has a range of at least 450 kilometers, but some, such as the Missile Defense Advocacy Agency, speculate that it likely has a range of 1,900 kilometers or so. As for the warheads, same as the Pukgoksong-1, call it half a ton of the old-fashioned stuff, and God only knows what of the atomic variety. As for other missiles, 38 North, a Stimson Center-associated North Korea reporting agency, believed that the submarine could also fire the Hwasal-2 cruise missile, their reasoning being that its 6 smaller launch tubes clearly couldn't accommodate proper ICBMs, but that the more modestly sized Hwasal-2 could be a perfect fit. The missile itself was first tested in 2022 and has been tested a total of 3 confirmed, 4 claimed times. Janes speculates that it has a 2,000-kilometer range and the capacity for both a 400-kilogram conventional warhead or some kind of nuclear capability, but they're unsure of exactly what. Moving away from ordnance, as for how many Sinpo classes are intended to be built, we also don't really know that either. But what we do know is that most analysts believe the Sinpo to be an expansive refit of North Korea's old Type 033 classes, and given the fact that more of them have been spotted at Pongdae Submarine Factory by satellite photography, it stands to reason that more are on the way. Just don't ask us how many.